borrow it. And then in 1787, over the course of that summer, they're going to allow the Constitutional Convention to use the room. So they were here for about 4 months. And today, the room is set up as it would have appeared when the Congress and the Constitutional Convention were using it. We have 13 tables set up that are facing the front of the room, one for each of the original 13 colonies, and then 13 new states that are going to send their delegates here. And the tables are arranged geographically, so you can imagine some of the New England delegation here at the north end of the room. People like John and Samuel Adams from Massachusetts, and southern delegates at the south end of the room. People from Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia's famous delegation probably somewhere in here that included Thomas Jefferson, Richard Henry Lee. And their presiding officer sits right up here. In 1787, of course, it's George Washington sitting here. And this is the chair that he will occupy. But 11 years before that, there's somebody else here that is a member of Massachusetts delegation, a wealthy merchant from Boston named John Hancock. And he'll be presiding when the decision is made to separate from Great Britain. That decision is not an easy one. It's only come after 15 years of political disputes between the American colonies and their central government in London. And it's come after more than a year of fighting. We've finally seen some of the British troops that had occupied Boston for many years make their way out west of the city to capture a powder magazine in the town of Concord. The local militia had turned out to stop them on Lexington Green early on the morning of April the 19th of 1775. And shots are fired. Once blood has been shed at Lexington and Concord, we're going to see people on both sides of the Atlantic really begin to think very differently about the political disputes that had been going on for so many years. We had seen a Continental Congress formed the year before to try and deal with these, but now the Second Continental Congress is meeting here, and they're also going to have to start thinking about defending the colonies from this military threat in Massachusetts. They will form a Continental Army here in June of 1775, and then a little over a year later, with no end to the fighting in sight, a lot of people are going to begin questioning whether there should be any connection between America and Great Britain at all. And the final decision will be made on July the 2nd. That's when the vote is taken here in the room. All of the delegations empowered to vote that day do vote in favor of immediate independence, although there are still some dissenting voices, even as late as July the 1st. And of course, we know thousands of Americans will choose to remain loyal, but the majority seem ready to move forward, certainly the majority in this room. And 2 days after they make that important decision, they adopt this, the actual declaration. And this is what would be sent out to the American people and eventually around the world to announce American independence. Most of it has been written by a 33-year-old Virginia lawyer named Thomas Jefferson. And Congress made close to 80 changes to Jefferson's original draft. Jefferson was unhappy about all of those changes in this declaration. But we end up with this strongly worded statement opposing the rule of King George III and listing close to 20 separate indictments against that king. He has taxed us without our consent. He has sent his army and has hired foreign mercenaries to make war against us, his own people. He has deprived us in certain cases of the right to a trial by jury. They're all listed right here, 15 years of grievances. And then in its second paragraph, preceding those grievances, we see a statement of principles on which the new American government will be based. The most famous part of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. Governments deriving their just power not from a king or a queen any longer, but from whom? Ultimately, it's supposed to come from the consent of the governed, meaning the people themselves. Rejecting the idea that kings and queens inherited positions of power. Of course, in 1776 doesn't mean all of the people in America. We have a more limited definition of who the people are. Women, Native Americans, African Americans, both free and enslaved, and many other groups will have to go on fighting for a very long time to win equal protection of their rights. under this new government. But what we do see beginning here in the Assembly Room, July 1776, is a political revolution, the start of an experiment to test whether people are capable of governing themselves. Ultimately, folks, it's such a powerful idea that the delegates decided they should have Jefferson's Declaration engrossed on parchment. And by the end of July, you would have seen a copy that looked similar to this, minus the signatures. It's not until August the 2nd that the engrossed declaration will be placed at the speaker's table. And on that day, John Hancock will be the first to sign. Most of the other delegates will sign that day as well. Eventually, 56 of them will add their signatures and pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to this great experiment with self-government. They will also commit themselves and thousands of Americans to a long war for independence, and that's going to go on for 7 years after the Declaration is signed here in the room. During most of those 7 years, the Continental Congress is right here. They are going to continue to direct and fund the war effort as best they can. They will also begin constructing a framework of national government, a firm league of friendship among the 13 former colonies known as the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. The states, for their part, will write their own constitutions, and we see new governments beginning to take shape. But in the years after the fighting, we see problems beginning to develop. States arguing with one another over boundaries. The national government unable to collect revenue and teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. When a rebellion breaks out in the western part of Massachusetts and threatens to spread to other parts of that Commonwealth, we're going to see a lot of people become very concerned that this experiment with self-government might not last past its 10th year. There are calls for reform of the Articles of Confederation from many parts of the country. And James Madison, Virginia, and Alexander Hamilton in New York are two of the strongest voices who are trying to strengthen the national government. They will succeed in bringing 55 delegates here to Philadelphia, and they're going to borrow this room over the summer of 1787. They arrive here by late May. They'll stay through the middle of September. And during that time, they are going to go far beyond their original mandate to fix the Articles of Confederation. They're actually going to propose a replacement, a new constitution that will look very different from the Articles. There will now be a two-house Congress. They work out an agreement between the large and the small states over representation. There's going to be an independent judiciary and a single chief executive elected every 4 years. What do we call that person, guys, down here in the front? President of the United States. Yeah, absolutely. And all of these features that are common to us today are basically put in place right here. It's the result of intense debate and compromise. One of the other issues that they're going to compromise on is that of slavery. And that's something that most of the men in the room understand has the potential to divide the country very deeply in the future. Many of these delegates are slave owners themselves, and others have profited by the trade. And although some of these same men are also opposed to it, ultimately they leave the decision to end slavery or let it continue to later generations who are going to have to fight a terrible civil war before it is finally abolished. But in 1787, their major concern is putting together a stable government, something to hold the fragile union of these 13 former colonies together for a while longer. And most of them believe that the Constitution stands a chance of doing that. Of course, it will still have to be approved by the states. It's going to have to be sent out for ratification. But most of the people in the room are very optimistic by the end of their meeting, September the 17th of 1787. And it's on that day, folks, that they're going to take their turns coming up, sign their names to this new plan for government, the one that begins, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. And just after they do this, their oldest delegate, Benjamin Franklin, is going to turn to the men sitting next to him and point to this. This is what is carved on the back of that chair, the one that George Washington sat in. Franklin says, often during the course of the sessions, I have looked at the sun on the president's chair without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. He says, now at length, I have the happiness to know that this is a rising or setting sun. Franklin and many others did believe that it was a rising and not a setting sun, that this was the dawning of a new day for America and its experiment with self-government. and perhaps the start of a new day for people all over the world who would begin revolutions and start writing national constitutions to determine their futures. Something that, of course, is still going on today, folks, all over the world. But in many ways, that movement towards democratic government has its beginnings right here on the floor of the Assembly Room in the old Pennsylvania State House, a place that we know as Independence Hall. So folks, I want to thank you for allowing me to share some of the story with you here in the place where it actually happened. We're going to exit to our left when we go back into the hallway and make our way back into the 21st century again. If you're wondering what's up on the second floor as we go past the stairs, that's where the executive branch of Pennsylvania's government would have been, the governor and his council. There's also a long gallery and a committee room, and that's open usually during the winters. So if you come back in January, February, you can visit. But thank you and enjoy the rest of your